All car crashes are scary, but unfortunately, some can cause permanent, life-altering injuries. And today's Injuries Are Personal with Reynolds Law. Attorney Carl Reynolds is here to talk about traumatic brain injuries and what that can mean in court. And I suppose we should apologize for a less than uplifting topic.
Yes.
But I think it's very important. And you had told me that this relates to a case that you'd been working with and that there's some good takeaways that all of us can understand about injuries and how to proceed after one occurs. So give us a little background as to why you wanted to talk about this.
So we just went to trial here in Sarasota County, and fortunately, at least from my perspective, the jury saw our client's injuries and suffering for what it was, and we got a sizable verdict. But I want to talk about kind of the catalyst for that, and what it's boiled down to was she was rear-ended and forced in the car in front. So she was subject to essentially two crashes in one, okay? You have the severe whiplash effect, but then it's followed by a sudden stop from a frontal impact. And what that does to the brain is you've got this hard casing around the skull to protect it from intrusion outside, but what happens is when you have that sudden movement, okay, we've all heard of shaken baby syndrome. Well, as adults, if we shake with that kind of violence, the brain is soft tissue banging against the skull inside of there, and it can cause basically concussion-like symptoms and brain injury on a microscopic level. It doesn't mean that our client was drooling and catatonic after the crash. She wasn't, but what happened over time and what developed over the next few years was her higher level thinking. She was a very bright lady. She scored high on a lot of cognitive tests, but she would leave the water running in her shower and flooded her bathroom twice. She left the front door of her house wide open. She came home and she didn't know if there was a burglar in there, if a family member was there. No, she had just left it without closing it. Someone who was kind of meticulous, OCD, and had a place for everything would lose her keys with frequency. She would get out milk and cereal for breakfast and put the milk back in the cupboard and the cereal in the fridge. I mean,
so maybe the phrase "never quite the same again."
Never quite the same again, and there's specific instances, and far too often we might chalk that up to, oh, you know, I'm just getting older, things like that. But if you seek the right kind of medical care and get the right diagnostics, the doctors can actually confirm, because we've learned through the NFL concussion protocol and things that they show up on a microscopic level, and we can actually see them now on what's called a diffuse tensor imaging MRI, it's DTI, and we can see some white matter changes, especially around the periphery of the brain where it's used to where we see this brain shear injury, and it manifests itself in people differently. And with her, she was jumbling her words, those sorts of things. And so we got a doctor to come in and talk about it. And these are things that it made her unemployable, unfortunately.
So now we have got loss of income, obviously loss of quality of life. And so the takeaway is maybe when we're in an accident, don't ever overlook that medical care, the follow-up care?
Correct. So you know, she didn't have bones sticking out her skin. She wasn't bleeding out, so she didn't rush to the hospital because she didn't think she had any life-threatening injuries. But she felt out of sorts. Her family said something's wrong, so she did follow up with the doctor the very next day. And that doctor had the foresight to send her to the right specialist. And those specialists then were able to confirm this traumatic brain injury and tried to provide treatment. And there are treatment protocols for it. There's hyperbaric chamber, there's PRP, intranasal, that, because what happens is when the brain cells are damaged, unlike other cells in our body, they don't repair, okay? Once they're dead or damaged, they don't repair, but what we can do is help the brain create new synapses. The brain can kind of compensate for it and create new synapses. And so there's a road to recovery. She may not regain all her mental capabilities, but we can try to minimize the effect, but it requires the proper treatment. You got to see the right doctors.
Right, and you have to see a doctor, as you've told us over and over again. Seek medical care even if you think everything's okay, so you have that baseline.
And these aren't inexpensive protocols, unfortunately. Right. They're very expensive, and sometimes they're not always covered by every insurance. So unfortunately, I become necessary to make sure that they get the proper care that they need, and that the responsible party then will pay for that in perpetuity so that they get the care they need. It's not a windfall to that person. She was on the doorstep of going to the Salvation Army with the bill she already had, and she had several $100,000 in her future just to try to get her anywhere close back to baseline.
And as you always point out, those are insurance companies whose job is to cover situations like this, and with the right people, people can get the help they need. So,
right. So
talk to the experts. That's the takeaway. Talk to the experts, and that includes legal experts. If you have any questions, accidents or otherwise, you can find Carl and his team by going to injuriesarepersonal.com.